Well, welcome everyone. My name is Rachel Mulder, and I work here at SaskPower in support of the Future Supply Engagement Project. I'm going to be your host and moderator today. And I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you for joining our webinar, Connecting Power Grids, Imports, Exports, and Interties. I will introduce our panelists shortly, but before I do that, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement. SaskPower's work reaches the ancestral lands of many nations. This includes those nations on Treaty 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10 territories, as well as the Lakota, Dakota, and Métis nations. We respect and honor Indigenous knowledge and the ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples and are committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I'm with you today from Regina, Saskatchewan, on Treaty 4 territory. And here at SaskPower, we're encouraged to take a moment after the land acknowledgement to share a personal action we've taken towards truth and reconciliation. So I want to share a book I recently read in honor of the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. The book is called The Education of Augie Morasti, and this memoir covers the 9 years that Augie spent at the St. Teresa Residential School in Manitoba. While reading one aspect when I was reading the book that really stood out to me was the contrast between the going to school experience for some of those residential school survivors and their families and my own family. I really encourage everyone to check out this great book. All right, let's dive in. So as you know, Saskatchewan's power system is changing, and we're in the process of updating our long-term power supply plan. We know that we have to deliver cost-effective, reliable, and sustainable power. But how do we get there? That's what our Future Supply Engagement Project is all about. It's a 5-stage process, and we're looking for your input at each stage. As you can see, we wrapped up stage 2 earlier this year, and during that stage, over 15,000 Saskatchewan residents participated. They told us they wanted to know more information on topics like the cost of power, the environmental trade-offs between the different power supply options, importing and exporting power, and solutions beyond customer self-generation. And that's why we're hosting Power Talks on each topic. And if you want to read more about what we've been hearing in this process, you can do that at saskpower.com/engage. So for today, we've brought together 2 panelists from Northpoint Energy Solutions, who I'll introduce shortly to chat about the ins and outs of importing and exporting power. I'll also pull in your questions for our panelists as I can throughout the conversation. And if time allows, I'll get to some additional Q's and A's at the end. Now, just to go into some of the support here available for you, at the bottom of your screen there, you're going to see a black banner that includes a chat button. Please use the chat if you're experiencing technical issues, and one of our team members are going to do their best to help you out. You'll also see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and that's where you can add your questions for our panelists. These questions can only be seen by our hosts. So we'll be taking questions at a couple of points during the webinar, and I'll be keeping my eyes on those and directing them to our panelists when I can. But please keep in mind, I'm going to be looking for questions that are related to today's material. So if you've got questions about the cost of power or those environmental impacts that I've mentioned, I would encourage you to check out saskpower.com/power talks, where we've posted the recordings from our previous sessions. Okay, now let's get to our panelists. All right. Amber is an economic grid optimization and trading consultant, or energy trader, at SaskPower. She's been part of the trading team at Northpoint for close to 20 years. Currently, she's tasked with ensuring next day exports to the United States Regional Trading Organization align with SaskPower's short-term power portfolio. Amber oversees Northpoint's transmission holdings, both inside our provincial borders and outside our boundaries too. Amber is also responsible for overseeing the administration of power contracts and authorizations among our trading partners and transmission counterparties. Much of Amber's work the past several years has been focused on managing the Manitoba Hydro Power Purchase Agreement. She's also part of the team planning for the Southwest Power Pool Power Purchase Agreement. Thanks for joining us, Amber. And Wayne started at SaskPower 27 years ago and has worked in a variety of roles. He started in customer service, but has spent most of his career in energy trading at Northpoint. Having had many years as an hourly energy trader, as well as pursuing growth trading opportunities on behalf of SaskPower in other jurisdictions in Canada and the USA, he's currently responsible for forward energy trading in the Alberta market, renewable energy certificate transactions from SaskPower's renewable energy sources, and many other projects, such as the proposed upcoming Southwest Power Pool intertie expansion. All right, Wayne, let's bring you into this. Why don't you start by explaining why North Point was created and how it operates today?
Sure, and hi everybody. A number of years ago in the late 90s, as power markets matured in North America, it became evident that some of the major players could monopolize the electricity market. Most of these were the legacy utilities who still knew or still had too much control over the main transmission grid. And so if you can control the flow of power, you can control the price of power. And so this led to some regulation changes in the United States to attempt to break up this sort of monopoly of knowledge to create a more fair market for power transactions. Um, and so as part of that process, while Sask Power is not subject to FERC jurisdiction per se, if you want to participate in the larger market in the United States, you sort of need to comply with the rules to meet the hurdle of entry. And so Sask Power has a pro forma tariff, which enables us to meet a lot of the rules and conditions that apply in the United States market, so that we have the ability and the right to participate there. So
Awesome.
North Point was created in 2001 as part of that process and spun off. We used to be part of Sask Power, called Sask Power Bulk Power and Trading, BPM&T, and we became North Point in 2001 as a wholly owned subsidiary of Sask Power. Our main focus is anywhere from the real time, which is this hour, next hour, all the way out to about 2 years in advance. After that time frame, it would become more of a supply planning time frame to look at, although we would still perhaps have input if they requested it. We have a 24-hour operations desk in North Point, working around the clock every day of the year. Our main focus starts off with reliability. We assist the best we can to enable the Grid Control Center to meet the needs of the Saskatchewan load. And after that, we filter in desires of having it the most economic operation that we can. There's lots of hydro management. We have a whole team working on reservoirs for discharging water through our hydro stations. There's a gas supply trading and management team. IPP integration into the power mix every day, and imports for either reliability as directed or requested from the Grid Control Center, or for economics from our own initiative, and as well as exporting on the interties for profit when available.
Awesome. Thanks for that background. Now I want to launch a poll, actually, just to get a sense of what folks know right now about Saskatchewan's interconnections. So that should be popping up here. There you go. So the question is, how many interconnections does Saskatchewan have with neighboring jurisdictions? Your choices: 2, 3, 4, or 5. So I'll just give you folks a minute here to put in your guesses. Let's see. Okay. Seen some movement there between 3 and 4. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and end that. So, okay, so there you can see the results. So most people guessed 3, but actually the correct answer is 4. But it may not be the 4 you're thinking of, as we don't connect in with the Northwest Territories, but we do have those 2 connections in Manitoba. So Wayne, we've got those 4 interconnections. How many transmission lines are included in those?
Yeah, so conceptually 3 could have been the right answer for the 3 sides, other than the Northwest Territories, like you say. But there's actually 5 lines going to Manitoba, scattered from Estevan up to Island Falls. The northern system is separately connected, and there's four lines on the southern system. We have 1 line crossing into North Dakota right now, but that's soon to be a total of 3 lines, with the additional international power line coming. And there's 1 connection, which is actually an AC/DC converter station that goes to Alberta.
Thanks. Okay, and you can see here, I've pulled up our Sask Power system map. And I think it would be helpful if we start setting the stage here for this importing, exporting discussion. It might kind of, maybe if you could explain what we're looking at here.
Sure. So this is just a quick look at where the generation facilities are in the province. And historically, our baseload generation is being in the southeast, with gas, hydro, and over time some wind scattered throughout the rest of the province. and that's slowly changing a little bit as we get more and more wind coming. The hydro, the total has been kind of stayed the same since the late 80s or so, when I think Nipawin was one of the newer plants built. An interesting thing for me on Saskatchewan's hydro system, SaskPower is not really considered a hydro utility per se, but we have kind of a nice, diverse, and flexible hydro resource here that's been developed over the years. And if you think of just the capacity available, we have 864 megawatts of hydropower versus a total of 5,400 megawatts of generation. If you contrast that with Alberta, they have roughly the same amount of hydro at 894 megawatts, but they have 20,000 megawatts of generation installed. So we have a very good hydro resource here, from Runner River at Island Falls or Nipawin to long-term storage at Lake Diefenbaker. So it's been well developed and flexible for the province.
Nice. Okay. So, and Wayne, I know you're not an engineer, so I don't want to put you in a tough spot, but can you tell us how transmission lines work, and maybe a little bit about our intertie capacity?
Yeah, and so this map shows a little bit of the separation on the Manitoba side, with the bulk of the transfer capability in the south. The northern intertie is related to the Island Falls Hydro Station, which was developed, I believe, as part of a mining project back 100 years ago or so. The capacities have changed over the years. The Alberta intertie is rated at 150 megawatts in each direction. It's currently limited to 90 megawatts. The facility is owned by ATCO Power in Alberta, but they are starting to experience some issues there with end of life of the project, because it's 25 or 30 years old, and so parts are hard to come by, and they're kind of an ongoing. It's a fluid situation as to what the ATC is there, but it should theoretically still be capable of 150 megawatts. The intertie to North Dakota is good for roughly 150 megawatts in each direction. The flow that can come north at the moment is zero. That's nothing to do with Saskatchewan or SaskPower. The utility in North Dakota hasn't maintained the capability there due to the recent explosive growth in load due to the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota. So we can still send 150 megawatts south, but nothing can flow north at this time. And Manitoba is approximately 325 megawatts of capacity there. The bulk of that capacity is used up with long-term contracts on firm annual transmission, and so that intertie is for the most part fully utilized on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thanks for that. So I guess what does it take to move electricity around the grid like this?
Well, at the most fundamental level, if SaskPower wants to import 100 megawatts, we would reduce our generation by 100 megawatts, and someone else, somewhere else, would increase their generation by 100 megawatts, and then the power would just organically flow into Saskatchewan. In practice, it's a lot more complex than that, of course, and so for the most part, as long as you're doing this in a controlled fashion, because if a unit trips offline unexpectedly, then the power will flow into Saskatchewan just by default. If there's a void here, the power will flow on the path of least resistance to fill that void. But if you have a controlled process where you want to go and purchase something because maybe it's cheaper than running Landis, as an example, the Landis power station, a simple cycle gas plant, you have to go, that's where Northpoint would come in. We would go look for somebody who's offering power, negotiate a price. We would have to go see if there's transmission capability from wherever they are, whether they could be in North Dakota, they could be in Florida, they could be, kind of anywhere. So you have to know if there's transmission capacity from wherever they are all the way back home to here. You have to pay for the transmission. You have to create an electronic record of how this power might flow to Saskatchewan from the source. And then everybody, every balancing authority, every transmission provider, everyone in that entire pathway must look at this transaction and say, okay, I approve this can flow without damaging my system. And then that's when the power kind of ends up in Saskatchewan.
Awesome, thank you. All right. I know just personally, I've been hearing a lot more about interconnections over the recent years. Just seems like they're popping up all the time. Do you have a sense of why that is?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on, I guess, that could impact that. But as time has gone forward, power became a more of a marketable commodity, as opposed to uh, something nobody really thought much about. And utilities just moved power if they needed to help a neighbor out, kind of thing. And it was kind of given to each other at cost, and you just helped each other keep the lights on. Then the economy became more complex, power became a commodity, and people were and companies were interested in trading this commodity. And so then the more connections you have, the more places you can move the
Mm,
electricity to get high value power to somewhere where it's worth less, kind of thing,
mm,
to equalize. And somebody's always making a profit along the way. The generation mix is changing, a lot more variable. Wind and solar, as an example, are a big part of that. And so if you have interties between different areas, it allows you to take advantage of the diversity of the
mm,
fuel source. And so it could be windy in South Dakota today and calm in Saskatchewan. And so if Saskatchewan then needs to buy power because ours aren't generating, our turbines, wind turbines aren't generating electricity, we can buy cheap power from North Dakota. Conversely, weather can change power prices as well. The price of power is different every minute of the day. Weather is a huge impact on that. And so in the winter time, you can often tell which way the weather's going to move. And so, for example, today it might be minus 35 in Calgary, and we're selling power to Calgary because it's warmer here. Tomorrow, the Chinook's expected to blow in Calgary, warm weather there, but the cold weather's moved here and SaskPower needs energy. So you flip that around and tomorrow you can buy import at a cheap price to serve your now higher loads.
right.
Interconnections just in general, I think, make power systems more reliable and more efficient from a cost perspective, because you can always um, or somebody somewhere is always going to move cheaper energy to the higher priced area. Being interconnected to something like um, the larger pool of electricity in the United States helps a lot. When you have a large unit trip here in Saskatchewan, there's an immediate dynamic response on the system that kind of fills that gap until
Mm,
such point as the market can kick in to change scheduled flows to match what actually happened physically in the moment.
mm. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so I'm seeing some questions are starting to come in, so I'm just going to take a look and let's try to get to a couple of those. Okay, so I'm not sure who wants to take this one, but has SaskPower ever thought about joining the northern and the southern grids other than through Manitoba, like we saw earlier on the capacity map?
Um, so just so I understand the question,
Yeah.
the northern grid, if you mean up in the north, like north of
Mm,
60 here in Canada, it's very difficult to interconnect there with a lot of lines of power line needed to be constructed in the Canadian Shield with a short construction season. I think I'm no transmission engineer, but I know it would be difficult and expensive to connect to the north. And as far as the south goes, we've had our interconnection to the US since the early 80s,
mm,
and that is looking to be expanded soon.
mm. Okay. All right. And Wayne, I know it looks like you, on the note of the capacity on our tie lines, are you able to elaborate on maybe some of the risks of not having enough space on those lines? Like,
Yeah, so there's, I guess, two main ways that could be a risk. And one is if, for example, some other entity had come and purchased the capacity from a place that you would be able to buy economic power from, then you've potentially lost a source of supply, or that entity can then be a middleman and charge you a big premium to resell you the power that you could have purchased yourself from that market. If they had found a different buyer for it elsewhere, they could remove that ability for you to use it um, altogether, which would
mm,
become a reliability issue if you needed to purchase that energy.
mm,
And they can also take away the market just from a profit perspective if you want to, for example, Alberta's been profitable for SaskPower for a number of years. They would have taken away our ability to
mm,
sell our resources here for profit in Alberta. And a lot of that can come down to who is willing to make the commitment to buy long-term firm transmission. There's different types of transmission, firm for the year or non-firm for the hour. And if you have longer-term transmission, then you protect yourself from losing that ability to either export for profit or import for reliability. And SaskPower has been quite proactive in attempting to ensure we have suitable transmission resources to get either energy into or out of the province as required.
Okay. We'll take one more and then we'll get back to our our presentation here. But this one, okay, we're gonna look at federal rules. So are there any federal rules that would require provincial utilities to work together on a national energy system instead of perhaps selling power to buyers in the US for potentially like higher profit?
Yeah, and so I think that is the CER's goal, is to encourage east-west transfer of electricity in Canada. The transmission system hasn't been built to accommodate that over the last 100 years. And there would need to be a lot of investment in the transmission system to enable that. For example, as I said earlier, the existing capacity between Saskatchewan and Manitoba is fully subscribed. And so any new purchases there would require a transmission build to enable more transfer capability. And there's also on our Alberta border, I think I mentioned that's an AC/DC converter station there. There's sort of two major pools of power in North America, the Eastern Interconnect, which is the larger one, and the Western Interconnect. And the border runs roughly south of Saskatchewan in the United States down to Texas. And the border is on the Alberta-Saskatchewan border here in Canada. And so there's 700,000 megawatts of a generation in the United States in the east and 250,000 in the west. And just to give an idea of the scope of the or scale of the problem, to make east-west bigger or better, there's only 1,300 megawatts of interties between the east and the west in the United States. And so it's a similar discrepancy here in Canada to move power from, say, Quebec through Ontario and Manitoba to come here to Saskatchewan or Alberta. And there's also, you could build transmission to go from BC to Alberta, but it's all mountain construction. It would be a hugely expensive and time-consuming project. But it's certainly, that is the CER's goal, is to encourage that going forward.
Awesome. Okay, Amber, you've been quiet, so we're going to turn to you now. I'm hoping you can elaborate a little bit on why exactly SaskPower imports power, and maybe some examples for us of when we do that.
For sure. No, we had one great example just this past summer. We needed to import power when one of our largest two coal plants went offline unexpectedly at Poplar River. And that's what's in these pictures here are some examples of what happened to the Poplar River plant. This was a big challenge, especially during some of our hotter days this summer, but we were able to buy when called upon from our neighbors to help keep the lights on. Generally, there's two ways to import power for SaskPower. There's the energy trading. So these are typically trades which are done over the existing infrastructure that's there, the existing ties. And this is shorter term durations like next hour, next day trades. We also import power on our firm contracts. So these are contracts which are for hundreds of megawatts over several years. And this can require the building of new transmission lines. So right now, we have two contracts with Manitoba that total 290 megawatts of power. And these are on firm contracts. And it did, the 100 megawatt contract that we have with Manitoba did initiate the last build of Birtle to Tantallon between Saskatchewan and Manitoba.
Thanks. And I guess on the flip side, can you tell us why and maybe some examples of when we export power?
Sure. No, one of the best examples that comes to mind thinking of exporting power was from the Texas event. If you remember in the news, they had a cold snap back in February of 2021, and our neighbor to the south, SPP, or the Southwest Power Pool, is connected to the northern border of Texas. They were also in an emergency at the same time that Texas was during this time frame. And during this cold snap, we were also in a cold spell. So kudos to our power production team and grid control, because even though it was minus 30 or 35 in Saskatchewan, we're built to handle that type of cold. And even though the southern states struggled, it was awesome to be able to help them out during that emergency situation to export power down to their market.
Yeah, that's a great example. Okay. I know that there's a lot to think about, it looks like here, when you're looking at energy trading. Maybe could you go through a couple of the most important ones here for us?
Sure. So that's right. This is a busy slide, but our top priority is always the reliability of the SaskPower system. It always trumps profits. So our goal is to optimize SaskPower's assets to make sure that SaskPower can always meet the demand for power. And as Wayne mentioned earlier, we have a team of traders. They're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And essentially, that's because you can't store power. It's always got to be moving. The traders are always monitoring and forecasting the power markets. And some of the things that they factor into their decisions is weather. That plays a huge factor on power prices, the flow of power. The extremes, whether it's really hot or really cold, can really drive up demand. And here in Saskatchewan, not surprisingly, we are winter peakers. The load is a big factor, and we, along with grid control, do our best to forecast what we think the load will be in the province, and this helps us plan what and when generation will be needed. Outages play a big factor. Both generators can be offline as well as transmission lines. So this is a huge factor. These are sometimes planned outages and sometimes unplanned, and that changes how we trade. Wind is a big factor. Now we monitor the wind speed as well as the timing of when the wind comes in. These changes can have huge swings on our system, and our tie lines play a huge factor in how we manage these fluctuations. We also monitor tie flows. Each of the tie lines that we have a limited amount of power that can flow on them. So we assess these limits and move power based on where there is. We also spend a lot of time researching the markets, and that helps us make decisions on how to use these tie lines to help balance the system. And some of the other things we look at are exchange rates when we buy and sell from the states, what our competitors are up to, and our trades also must always follow the internal guidelines as well as the compliance policies that we have.
Okay. That's pretty complex. So I'm going to try and bring this together now.
Yeah.
So we've got our generation. We know we got baseload and intermittent there. We've got those longer term power purchase agreements and the shorter term energy trades. Can you explain how this kind of all comes together?
For sure. So this slide is, I still remember from my first day on the job, to think of the grid as a very shallow bathtub or a bucket, and the electricity flows on it like water. And then any of the generators, whether it's coal, gas, wind, solar, supplies water like a faucet to the grid. And any user of power is essentially like a drain out of the bathtub or the bucket. And because it's so shallow, it can't store any of this water. The bulk power operations there, if you see that, the water level there represents the frequency of the grid. And so that's a measure of how well the supply and demand are balanced. On our continent in North America, it should be around 60 hertz. And then on this drawing, the interties that we work on can be either a faucet or a drain. They can go either way. In the same vein, same with DER, like rooftop solar, they can be either a faucet into our grid or a drain.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's jump over now to another trivia question. So we've talked a bit about, that Northpoint is generating revenue here for us. So let's launch that. How much revenue did Northpoint generate for SaskPower between the years of 1999 and 2023? So you've got three options there: 500 million, 750 million, or 840 million. Let's see, looks like bouncing around there a bit. Just give everyone a chance to get their votes in. Oh, it's very, very close. Okay. Well, almost pretty much tied, but the correct answer is $840 million. So Wayne, can you please share, I think it's a good time to bring in kind of where and how Northpoint is generating these funds?
Sure. And one thing I might comment on the last slide too,
Yeah.
as it refers to it as revenue, but I would almost consider it more of a profit figure. The only thing that isn't profit per se, the $840 million, because part of it is savings for the utility. If we're purchasing power that's cheaper than running our own generation, that's considered a savings. Contributions is selling our own resources for a profit somewhere in a different market. So if you had a gas plant that you could fire up or happen to have a spare Shand output today that you could sell to Alberta, all of those things are contributions, but that's actually a profit from the entire cost of moving the power to Alberta from the power station. And some of it also is from the growth transactions that we had done in the past with some transmission that we owned in British Columbia, and we used to sell power from the northwestern United States across BC into the Alberta market. And if you look at this graph here with the from 1999, it's quite erratic, if you want to call it that, and it kind of shows the feast or famine of how the cyclical power market, how cyclical the power market can be. Then the first part on the left there, the 99 to roughly 2000, beginning of 2002. That's mostly related to Alberta prices, but they were driven in part by the California energy crisis, which you might have remember hearing about the Enron manipulating power markets in California and so on. And that really messed up the entire power market all the way from San Diego to Calgary. And it was all driven by power prices in California to a certain extent, because people were exporting the full ability to export power out of Alberta to capitalize on the arbitrage opportunity to sell it to California. And so some of our profit there came as a direct result of sort of capitalizing, if you will, on Enron manipulating their own market in the States. So bad on them, but it worked out for those that were in a position to sell to them. And we weren't really selling to Enron. We were selling to the California Department of Water Power, the publicly owned utilities that were serving load. So it wasn't like you were participating in the deception. It was more of a, this is what's happening, and we have $20 power here, so we're gonna sell it there for 500. So that was kind of how that worked at that time. And then when that crisis went away, power prices came down quite a bit, and then the up and down after that, up until about 2014, is really just the cyclical nature of the Alberta market. Alberta doesn't have a capacity market. All the prices, if you build a power station, you have to recapture all of your costs from the energy price in Alberta. And so as prices are high for a while, people start seeing that they can build a new power station and capitalize on this. And then too many companies build and it's over installed and the price collapses for a few years. Nobody installs anything and there's a shortage, so then prices go back up. And that's kind of how Alberta has operated since they first started deregulating back around 1996. And then in 2014, there was quite a sustained decline in power prices, and that those couple of years there, the price for the whole year was around $20 Canadian on the wholesale market for electricity. So very, very low power prices. That was great for consumers who needed to buy electricity, and many of them in Alberta with a different market, they don't have like a defined power rate like we pay here in Saskatchewan for our residential rate. They may have market-based rates in Alberta, so this was good for them as they've had some very volatile prices, some of those people, for their home supply. And then the last spike on the right-hand side of this graph here has been a few things. There's been a recovery of or return to volatility in Alberta, so prices have been high. out there. Additionally to that, the SPP market south of us in the States has become quite a bit higher and more volatile than it had been in the past. Most of those price increases have been related to some transmission issues that have been going on in North Dakota and so on. And so that may moderate in the near term or early next year to more stable pricing, but at the moment prices are quite high in the States. And all of that red mark, or I guess it's red, all of those areas under there are really a great success story, not really only for trading, but that means we had capacity on the generation fleet available, transmission available, gas supply at good prices with hedging gas supply, all these things coming together at the same time to enable us to sell power to these markets that have high prices. We've really been able to use SaskPower's system to the fullest for the benefit of the company. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so we know we're selling a lot of power to Alberta. Amber, do you want to tell us about the other jurisdictions out there?
Sure. No, this is a good slide. It represents where we trade. The orange arrows there are kind of where we sell SaskPower's assets, or sorry, where we spend the bulk of our time optimizing SaskPower's assets and generation. The green lines are where we can trade if we foresee a profit being able to do so. Yeah, definitely spend most of the time in the orange zone there.
Okay. I think we have this other one here.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes. So this is just an instant snapshot of the pricing for the markets that we deal in. The dark blue, the Alberta, that has one price. The red pricing there, that's the SPP nodal prices that that we deal with. And then the blue is actually SPP's neighbor market, MISO. And we do just, we do watch Ontario pricing as well as PJM. And then in that white box, that's the natural gas pricing at the time.
Okay. All right. And Amber, I know you also work a lot on the Manitoba Hydro PPA. Can you give us a bit of a rundown on that agreement?
For sure. So we have 2 contracts with Manitoba currently. There's the 100 megawatt deal. That one is for 20 years. That one started June 1st of 2020 and ends at the end of May in 2040. That one is the one that initiated the latest transmission line build. We also have the 190 megawatt contract with Manitoba. That one just started, I guess, just over a year ago now. And that one's for 30 years unless Manitoba's own internal load exceeds their forecast, and then they do have an option to opt out.
Okay. And maybe, can you tell us at all like what we can expect to see from them in the future?
For sure. No, Manitoba is a hydro system, and so they have stated they've built their last hydro plant. In their latest integrated resource plan, Manitoba did state that their demand for power will double over the next 20 years. And so what that means is there's no more long-term firm sales available for them.
Okay. All right, good to know. And let's look to our western neighbors next, Alberta. What can you tell us?
Sure. Alberta is the smallest power market in North America. It's very thinly traded compared to other markets. It's very volatile, so prices will go from $20 to $800 a megawatt. And right now, that teal line there, we have 150 megawatt intertie with Alberta. It's derated to 90 currently. They've managed to basically get off coal. They have a really high natural gas fleet. They've completed substantial number of conversions of their coal units to natural gas. And for their future, they are planning heavily on the hydrogen technology as well as putting carbon capture on their natural gas plants.
Okay. Okay, and of course to the south, we've kind of talked about SPP a little bit.
Yeah.
Folks might be familiar with it because SaskPower is planning to build that international power line that will eventually connect us there. What can you tell us about SPP?
Sure. SPP has been an RTO since 2004, and they've been our direct neighbor since 2015. As you can see, their geographic footprint is situated across the richest wind resource in North America. They manage the electric system across 15 states. They are expanding west in the near future or so. They're a heavily wind resource RTO. They have 32,000 megawatts of wind capacity installed. And they do state boldly that last year they were able to supply 88% of their load on one day based from wind generation.
Wow. Before I get there, RTO, can you
Yes.
elaborate on what that means? Sorry.
Yeah. No, I know these acronyms. RTO it stands for Regional Transmission Organization. So essentially an RTO is like the air traffic controller in this red area here. They control the power flows and they watch the power as well as the transmission infrastructure in that area.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so going back, so that 88%, that's a really impressive number.
It is.
How is that possible?
So this map is actually the wind speed across America. And going back to the SPP slide, you can see it's almost a mirror of where the wind is the strongest in the states. So
Okay.
when the load was low, it was a very windy day. And yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. Oh yeah, and here we do have a little bit of
Yeah.
information about their
Yeah.
installed wind.
Yeah, heavy wind.
All right. So this might be a bit of a tough one, but we've been getting this question a lot through our future supply engagement project, that Saskatchewan residents are really uncomfortable with the idea of SaskPower relying on imported power. I think the big worry there is whether or not we can count on utilities to reliably provide us with power. So as we're looking forward and contemplating a future where we're more connected than ever, how do we protect ourselves?
No, and that's fair. It feels like it would be it'd be nice to be independent, but in our business, we rely on each other's systems. The more connected we are, the more reliable our whole system is. And with the Manitoba contract specifically, they're a legally binding contract, and we bring this power home on firm transmission as well as the firm capacity. And these contracts really do help SaskPower meet our emission targets and our own renewable goals. The contracts, both the 100 as well as the 190, contain the highest level of a power contract that we could buy.
One other comment on that question for me, if you think about the current North Dakota intertie that we have right now, that line was energized in, I believe it was 1981. And part of the justification for that project at the time was the successful negotiation of a 25-year diversity contract with our neighboring utility in North Dakota. And so what that means is they were a summer peaker, our peak load is in the winter. So it was complementary to have this diversity contract where for 6 months of the year, we would deliver 50 megawatts of power to them in the summer. And for this 6 months of winter, they would deliver 50 megawatts to SaskPower in the winter. And that was a very successful contract. It was an example of a really flexible supply. We had the capacity when we needed it in the winter, and we had access to the market to move energy south in the summer when we didn't need the capacity. So great flexibility there. And just for the conceptually, the 50 megawatts at the time in 1981, so Boundary Dam 6 had just come online in 1978. It was our first 300 megawatt coal plant. Prior to that, our largest generator here in Saskatchewan was 150 megawatts. And so 50 megawatts of winter capacity at that time was kind of a big deal for the province. And so these types of transactions aren't new, they're not unknown. SaskPower has been doing this type of work since I was in kindergarten, which sounds kind of bad. In 1977, I was in kindergarten when they were negotiating that diversity contract. So this is not new. We've had other very successful partners with the Meridian Cogen plant in Lloydminster since I think they started work on that project in the late 90s. All kinds of new IPP wind resources that have been negotiated and implemented in the interim since then. So this is a line of work that SaskPower is very invested in over the last 30, 40 years and has a lot of experience with.
Okay. So I know it's been mentioned, I think Amber, you just kind of talked to this, that these interconnections can help SaskPower kind of meet our emissions targets of net zero GHGs by 2050. I'm wondering if either of you if we've missed any of the other benefits to increasing interconnections, or if you want to summarize kind of like what these benefits are.
I know one of the benefits from the Manitoba hydro contracts, because it is a hydro resource that we are essentially buying. We do get the renewable energy credits along with the energy and the capacity from those contracts. So that does go to that helps with our emissions.
Okay.
Yeah, and anytime any interconnection allows increased both reliability for the system and a more diverse foundation for a better economic operation on a day-to-day annual basis. Diversity of supply complements SaskPower's own supply additions that are coming. Any intertie can be used at any time to bridge gaps in technology. Who knows what might come down the road? We could be burning hydrogen. A scientist could tell us they fix fusion power, figure out fusion power, and it's going to be ready someday. So tie lines you can import today, sell tomorrow. They're here to balance everything else you're doing.
Nice, thanks. Okay, so we've had quite a few questions come in, so we've got some time now to get to those. So there's a few just going back to that Poplar River example that we shared earlier, Amber. So first, what were we seeing? People are curious about what those images were. So I think I think it's straw. It was straw, I think.
Yeah.
Right?
So it was actually, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Wayne, it was the pumping station for Poplar River, which controlled the two coal plants themselves. And from my understanding, it was a flood that came into the pump house. And along with the flood, it went through a hayfield. And so it was this mud hay mixture. And when it dried, it caked on all the equipment and it was a mess.
Yeah.
And so it was down from, I'm going to say the beginning of June till the middle of August. My dates might be a little off, but somewhere around there. So it was a substantial outage and a big mess to clean up, but they did a good job and it's running now.
And I think part of that too, Amber, is that like the plant was running at the time that the flood, like they were generating power at the time of the flood. And so all that hay and straw also got sucked into the water that gets fed into the power station itself. And so all of the tubes going through the entire power station got contaminated with all of this and had to be flushed as well. It wasn't just cleaning out the pump house; you had to clean out the whole plant.
Oh man, well I guess that's why it took so long. That's a task and a half. So I guess a follow up on that one as well. So we talked, you explained how we imported to make up for that loss in generation. But what would have happened if there had been no power out there to buy? Do you know?
Sure. No.
Yeah.
SaskPower has a few steps that they would take when the demand exceeds the supply that we have. And this would be, if we couldn't buy, we would ask our largest industrial customers to curtail their use. And if that's not enough, the next step, unfortunately, would be a series of rotating outages through the province to reduce the demand.
Okay.
And hopefully avoid a larger outage, but
right. I think that's something we've maybe heard about in other jurisdictions. I know California, for example. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think this one is just maybe a point of clarification. So, we've talked about there's like a 500 megawatt agreement with SPP, but also a 650 megawatt agreement with SPP. Can you explain what the difference is there?
Yeah, so the current intertie, as I mentioned, is capable of 150 megawatts. And the expansion of the transmission capacity is for an additional 500 megawatts of transmission capacity. So there would be a total of 650 megawatts that could flow between Canada and the US, but the future PPA is only envisioned to utilize 500 megawatts of that capacity, and there will be the additional 150 on top of that would be just available to use on a non-contracted basis in the hourly market or as required by the SaskPower system.
Okay, now it looks like staying on the topic here of SPP, looks like there's some concern here. Are like SaskPower shutting down our coal plants and then just going to keep turn and go buy coal generated power from the States?
There will be no coal contracted from the United States, and in fact, it's a specific statement that will be included in the request for the proposal to supply, that they need to be able to demonstrate that there is no capacity coming from any coal-fired generation, whether it has carbon capture attached to it or not in the United States.
I guess in a general question here around who's going to pay for that, for the transmission line with SPP?
SaskPower is. Yeah.
Well, and I think for our portion, I think in the state that are we
Yes.
the base? Okay.
Both, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Both sides, yeah.
Okay, let's see what else we've got here. So is Saskatchewan, yeah, this is a good one. Are we charged carbon tax on the energy imported from the States?
No, there's no tax at the border from the Canadian government.
Let's take a look here. Just some question again, this now going probably quite early on. Can you explain a little bit about the ownership structure of Northpoint and what happens to the profits that Northpoint makes?
Oh, sure. Northpoint is part of SaskPower. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of SaskPower. Amber and I both get a paycheck that says SaskPower on the paycheck, and we work here in head office. Any profits derived from any type of trading activity that's done by Northpoint all go back to SaskPower. We work for the mothership here. Yeah.
And so ultimately, I guess for our ratepayers and our customers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is a technical one. So I guess how long does it take to make an energy transaction over an intertie connection? Like from start to finish? Yeah.
Pretty quick.
Okay.
We're seasoned now, but if you need to buy, essentially you buy the transmission for where you want to flow, and then you make an electronic. I know Wayne talked about it earlier. It's called an e-tag, and it can be done in as little as a minute if the transmission gets approved. The provider of the transmission needs to say that it's there and approve you using it, essentially. So it would take minutes.
Okay. Oh, good to
know.
Okay. Oh, okay, back to SPP a little bit here. Are you guys, I know this is not totally your area, but are you able to tell us where that international power line is going to connect into SaskPower's grid?
Into SaskPower's?
Yeah.
It would be close to the Boundary Dam station, just north of North Dakota.
Okay. And how much, when we talk about that SPP again, importing, exporting, is that it's all firm or there's going to be room there for more trades? Sorry.
There should be room.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, it would be a mix of a firm contract and market activity over and above that as required.
Okay. So, okay. How about well, this was kind of, we're going to look at comparing here that energy trading to the PPAs. So besides generating profits, what are the advantages of one over the other?
PPAs function more like baseload. They're reliable, secure. You can plan for them. Energy trading is a bit typically more short term. So you're dealing with the shorter term fluctuations more so than general power needs. I don't know.
Yeah, we're kind of here to adapt to
Okay.
whatever happens and try and either capitalize on something or make something better that might be bad if you had a bit of a disaster, such as the Poplar River Station that you were anticipating.
Okay. Oh, and another, I think this is just a point of clarification. So this is going back to the economic return slide there. What did that CNS stand for on that slide? Maybe
that was the contributions and savings. When I was saying that the savings is basically imports for economics, or contributions is what we profited to sell our resources for to another market.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, and this one this might be one more for grid control, but I'm going to throw it at you. Feel free to decline. So this is now related to that bucket analogy. How does spinning reserve and inertia factor into the bucket? Is that something you can get into?
From my understanding, that would be kind of where we operate, would be the spinning reserve that you have for bulk power management, that would be online, ready to go, ready to roll, as far as my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah, and I like the concept of inertia.
Yeah.
Just as a layman who is not a power engineer, but it goes back to what I said about the size of the Eastern Interconnect in North America. It's 700,000 megawatts of power, and a lot of that is connected to these huge steel shafts that are spinning hundreds of millions of tons of steel that's spinning all the time around the clock. And so that adds a lot of stability to the grid. Like a flywheel on your car keeps the car going if you lose a spark plug. It's a very helpful thing for reliability. And so if we were operating on our own and you lost the Shan power station, and then you really need to be having a lot of things in place to react to that instantaneously. Whereas if you have the entire hundreds of millions of tons of steel turning, that helps give you time to make it right when the unit comes offline.
Okay, I think we've got time for probably just like one more question here. And I'm personally curious about this one too, so let's go with this one. Is the amount of CO2 emissions or how green a power is, like, does that factor into the decisions about where to purchase power from today?
For the most part, our directive is to be the most economically efficient. And so there are initiatives that the company's undertaken to procure wind, for example, from IPPs, or we have built our own wind facilities in the past. There's solar coming. There are different fuel mixes coming that address the actual carbon emissions. But we, at the moment, are looking to make power reliable and affordable for the end user on top of or prior to looking to buy from a particular generator, say in Alberta. If we had the option to buy from a particular Alberta generator and we had to pay double to buy from a wind generator or just pay the pool price to buy from the pool, at this point in time, we would buy from the pool because we are looking to maintain our rate structure as well.
Thanks. Okay, so that's all we have for questions. But as I'm closing out today's session, I'm just going to pop up an evaluation for everybody to take here, and hopefully you should see that now. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining. Thanks Amber and Wayne for sharing your knowledge and your willingness to share your perspectives and experiences with us. And a very warm thank you to everyone who connected in, from your desks or wherever you are over your lunch hour. As I mentioned in the outset, this discussion was recorded. So we're going to be posting that on sasspower.com, again, on that /Power Talks, and that'll be up in a few days here. And feel free to share that around with your friends or rewatch it, or if you had to drop off early, then this is your chance to see it again. And I would like to remind people too, if we didn't get to your question, we have an online engagement hub that you can find at sasspower.com/engage, where you can submit a question. You can submit them to our future supply team. It's also actually where you can also find the SMR project hub. So you can submit a question if you have a nuclear specific for them there. And I guess I'll do a final plug here for our final Power Talk session. It's coming up next week on October 12th. And during that session, I'm going to chat with our folks from Customer Solutions to talk about the shared renewables programs that they're exploring. And that one will be a little different. We're going to have, they really want to hear from the audience their thoughts and feedback on this potential program that they're exploring. So it's going to be a bit more interactive, so a little different than these last three. And yeah, so you can definitely register for that one as well, where you registered for this one, sasspower.com/powertalks. And I think that's it. Thanks again to our panelists, everyone for joining. And yeah, I hope you guys have a great afternoon.